Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. We invite you to join us as we look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, the hot story in New Haven these days is a once-in-a-generation moment at Tweed, New Haven Airport. For decades, we've been talking about whether we can have a bigger airport that has more commercial air traffic, and it looks like it's about to happen, folks. And two folks behind the wheel making it happen are in the studio today to tell us about the latest. Say good morning to Jorge Roberts, CEO of Avports, the company that operates all over the world and is operating the Tweed Airport. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Come and visit in town. And as someone familiar to this show, Sean Scanlon, the head of the Tweed New Haven Airport Authority. Thanks for coming in, Sean.
Good to be back, Paul.
And before we go into the nitty-gritty, let's help people understand who's who and what's what. So Tweed New Haven Airport is a public airport. It's run by a quasi-public agency called the Tweed New Haven Airport Authority, correct? That's how it's always been done. Government appoints the people to it, and they make the decisions. They operate under rules by the Federal Aviation Administration.
You got it.
So far, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like when I do the weekly news quiz in the Wall Street Journal, you get like 5 out of 8, and then you think, am I going to make it? You know, I hate when they give you 3 options, but I think we got it. So Avports has been managing the airport under a contract for years. But we never really heard much about you guys because it wasn't as prominent a role. But now, under a new 43-year lease that's about to be approved or under consideration, you're stepping up the game, right? You're not just managing the place. You're going to oversee a major expansion, 70,000 square foot new terminal that opens on East Haven, 4 to 6 gates, $7 million upgrade and a longer runway. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Okay, so nothing missing. Okay, so in other words, now we're in the process. Where are we now in that process? You announced that you had a deal. It was being negotiated. Now it needs a bunch of approvals, but not everything needs an approval from everybody, correct?
So really, Paul, the way to think about it is there are many, many steps that we have to go through. We're starting that process now, the first of which is before the City Plan Commission right now to do what we refer to as the West Terminal Rehab.
And that's New Haven.
That's on the New Haven side, yeah. So we want to be able to
And just to remind people, Tweed New Haven is on the border. The Morris Cove neighborhood of New Haven and East Haven.
Our runway literally splits the town line in half. Wow. So on one side of the runway is East Haven, on the other side is New Haven. And we have a really exciting thing happening right now, which is that Avelo Airlines just last week came in here and announced that they're going to be starting to do 4 different cities in Florida starting on November 3rd. In order to accommodate them, we have to do a little work on the existing terminal, and that's what we're before the City Plan Commission for right now. Simultaneously, we're going before the New Haven Board of Aldermen to seek an extension to our lease. So we have had a lease with the City of New Haven for decades. It's in state statute, and we're asking for 43 more years on the city lease in order to continue operating the airport as the airport authority. There will always be an executive director. There will always be an authority. The city will always own the airport. The only difference is our long-term partner, Avports, who've been working with us for 22 years, and I are going to work forward on doing that expansion plan that you just talked about, Paul.
But so Avport has a stepped-up role under this 43-year lease.
Yeah, it's a different role, but the relationship is the same. The relationship of constantly working together hand in hand to offer the best possible service for our customers will not change. Some of the internal stuff will change a little bit, but externally, all the same checks and balances will still exist there, and the relationship will still exist as it has for 22 years.
So New Haven owns the whole airport, including the East Haven side?
They do.
That must make the people in East Haven not so happy.
Well, I think that it's been that way since our literal 90th anniversary is on Thursday. So for 90 years, that has been the case, and, that's where we're at.
So just so our readers do get a little confused, as do I, so the city plan does a site plan review. That means you don't need any special permission like zoning, and that's just for the immediate accommodations for Avelo Airlines, a budget flyer that's a new entrant into the market, to start doing these 4 flights. You want to get that done by November. That's separate from the matter coming to the Board of Alders.
It is.
Which is the big 43-year.
Correct.
Okay, so Jorge Roberts, you've been at Avports. Airports operates, I think, what was the number? You have 150 airports that you manage?
That would be great. No, we're operating at 10 airports today.
Oh, my God. Where'd I get 150? I thought you had some kind of worldwide imprint.
One day. No, one day.
But you do operate Westchester County Airport,
correct? Yeah.
So how does this fit in? Westchester County Airport's one option for a lot of people in New Haven. We go an hour that way with more traffic. We go an hour, quarter to Bradley with less traffic. How does this fit in for you with running White Plains as well? How's Tweed going to figure into that map?
Look, I think how we approach every relationship we have with our client, and in that case over there is the Westchester County, and in this case is the authority. We run them separately and address and make sure that we are complying with the agreement and delivering on what we promised. Right? So
what do we need?
We've made it work. Right?
See, White Plains, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, because you know it, I don't. Seeing White Plains jumped into this incredible need, which is that it's a headache and this big hassle to try to get to LaGuardia or JFK. They're always overloaded. So all these people who live within an hour of White Plains could just more easily, except park for good, in White Plains and get all these other flights, right? So they have more business than they can handle. Am I wrong about that?
That's correct. So in the case of White Plains, it's an airport that's constrained. It also has a limit on the number of flights that can depart per hour. And people don't realize that White Plains is really more of a corporate aviation airport. It is the third busiest in the U.S.
That's because White Plains, when I grew up there in the 70s and 60s, was more of a corporation town than a residential town.
I think it still is.
A lot of headquarters.
IBM is there, PepsiCo, and other firms have their hangars there.
But then it evolved to include commercial flights for that overflow, right?
It has some commercial flights, but it only represents 13% of its traffic.
So I guess what I was getting at, and we got already a question here from Lorena Venegas, which we'll get to in a moment.
Hi, Lorena.
That tells me there might be a market, right? Because what you're looking for is the smaller airport market, right? There's a need. Is that what you're seeing? Like, why is it worth your company to invest all this money and sign on? Where's the market that's not being met? Is it overflow from White Plains because they have limits on what they can do? Is Bradley filled up? Why are you seeing it as profitable to do this?
Yeah, no, look, airlines fly to an airport because of a market, right? Mm-hmm. And not because of you have facilities or an airport. In the case of the New York market, it's a pretty saturated market. But the main thing about where Tweed sits, it's Southern Connecticut. It's an underserved market, right? Meaning most people from our studies are traveling 2.5 hours down to New York.
Right,
they're not going to Westchester, right?
And that's a surprise, right? When I took this job just about 2 years ago, I was shocked at that data because I sort of thought that everyone just went up to Bradley. That's actually not the case.
Is that the reason? Because there's so many more options at the other? It's not a close.
It's 1 million people who live in this catchment area. That is the one of the most, if not the top 3 most underserved markets in the entire country. And that's why for decades people have been saying, hey, we want more service out of Tweed. We want more service out of Tweed. So why
is it, again, I'm really ignorant on this stuff. I got to be honest with you that I cover this story because I think it's incredibly important. But unlike stuff like police brutality or city budget, I've never kind of helps me covered. I've never been invested on one side or another because I feel like people care so much about it and then the horrible or great things don't end up happening. We brought all these other airlines over time. We had Chicago service, we had DC. We keep hearing, and I know it's true, that people want other alternatives, but now American, again, is probably going to be dropping out. So if the market is there, why haven't these airlines been there before? Is it because we needed to make structural improvements at the airport to accommodate it? Is that all it is?
It's all about structure and infrastructure, and it's a chicken and the egg problem. There's a lot of people who live in the neighborhood who are our friends that say, oh my God, why are we ever do this because of all these things that have happened in the past? Well, all those things happened in the past because we never had the infrastructure in place to move forward. And for 10 years, the reason we didn't have that infrastructure is not because we didn't want to put it forward or because Jorge's company didn't want to invest in us. It's because there was a law on the books that said we couldn't literally move forward with the plans that we knew would work to actually build that infrastructure. In March of 2020, a week after the world shut down because of COVID, we won a case before the United States Supreme Court that literally nobody was talking about because the world was ending at that time.
Actually, we talked about it. People were talking about it in the Independent. Yeah,
the Independent talked about it, but the rest of the world was not talking about it, and that paved the way for us to be able to move forward. We started our master plan process to look at the length of the runway and what the right length would be. We had multiple public meetings. It was an 18-month process. We came to a number, and Jorge, because they are our long-term partner, believes in this airport, decided to make that investment. And we really believe that if now that is out of the way and we can move forward and do the infrastructure that we know directly from the airlines. I mean, Jorge and I have met with these major airlines. Every single one of them has sat across from a table like the one we're sitting at right now and said, you know what? We know the market is there. We love New Haven. We want to serve New Haven, but we just can't make that runway work. We have found what we believe to be the most sustainable, both environmentally and economically, number that we need on the runway, 6635, which is 1,000 more feet than we have right now, Paul. And we're confident that if we do that and we put the infrastructure in place to make those flights work, we will be able to finally offer the service that people have been asking for.
So
here.
what is different about that service and the American Airlines current service that isn't working to Philly?
Well, look, I think Jorge can chime in on this. American has a lot of problems right now. If you look at their last quarterly earnings, they are lagging way behind the rest of the legacy carriers. So they have some internal structural problems that are causing some of the pressures that we're seeing. The airline industry in general has had a really tough time in the last few months. And obviously during the last few years, it's coming back. It's coming back faster than I think people thought it would. But the legacy carriers still lost a ton of money during COVID. They're losing a ton of money today. And I think if they decide that they're not going to service this market, it's not a reflection so much on our market itself. It's a reflection on the fact that we still have not built that infrastructure yet. But if they leave, again, not a certainty yet. If they leave, I'm confident that they will come back, as will many other carriers.
Is there something, Jorge, by definition different about the service that American was offering to Philly and the market you see for growth that justifies investing $70 million over these years?
I think you got to separate between the types of demand, right? And there's the leisure demand and there's the business corporate travel. Right. And the legacy carriers like American Airlines focus more on that corporate travel, but also they're network carriers. So it's based on what Sean was mentioning, in terms of the number of aircraft they have available and much strategic kind of decisions that they make around their hubs. And right. So they're pulling out of secondary airports, and that's leaving an opportunity for new entrants like Avelo. We know also there's a new airline, Breeze, that just started at Bradley, for example. So there's an opportunity for new entrants to serve.
Of course, and am I wrong that we're all having JetBlue flashbacks when we look at this map that Avelo? So Avelo's a new airline. They're a budget carrier. They start out with a hub in California, and they have a bunch of flights there. Now they're trying to draw the map on the East Coast, and that's how they're starting out, with going from Tweed to the 4 locations in Florida. So basically, our gamble is on a leisure, new, nimble entrant into a market with a gap left behind by legacy carriers dealing with network concerns, business focus. Are we looking more at leisure with the budget airlines?
Well, the majority of the demand is on leisure. There is corporate demand as well from the local businesses and organizations, but it's going to be more complementary. And so the majority of the people, the strongest demand is towards Florida, and people want to go to Florida. They want to go to Disneyland, Disney World, sorry, and the beaches, and that's what that.
And we also want to register to vote in the next primary and governor election. Pretend we're all Florida residents. That's to the side. So maybe that explains my confusion as someone who doesn't understand the industry. When I think about the Chicago service not working out, the Philadelphia service not working out, I think part of the reason that debate gets sidetracked is no one ever talks about the leisure market. We're always told as an article of faith that the reason we lost one of our big biotech companies last year was that they couldn't fly in and out. Yale is always saying we will be able to grow biotech jobs if we can fly in and out. But then everyone was asking me, when you guys had your big announcement about the expansion, where was Yale? The chamber is there saying yay. But I think some of the skepticism neutral people like myself have always had is that we were told in oral faith that we will get all these jobs once we have a long enough runway for business flights, but now we're seeing the business carriers not succeed in the leisure market being invested in.
But it's not an either or, right? It's the time we're in today. right? Right now, in the fall of 2021, where COVID still lingers out here, business travel has not come back. The CEO of Avelo, at his announcement last week, very clearly indicated that he plans to announce in the coming months other destinations that he's going to serve. And those other
are those going to be leisure or are those going to be business?
I believe that there will be a combination of both. And I believe that you will see some business destinations there. You will see maybe some more leisure destinations there. It's a snapshot in time what he's doing. And so for anybody to say, well, Yale wasn't there, now they're changing their business model. No, this is what he's deciding to do right now based on the information in front of him, which, as Jorge just said, the leisure market is booming right now. People want to go to Florida in the fall. They're going to do that. But we have other carriers that we've been talking to about the business market. I believe he is going to get involved in the business market in the near future. And our goal at the end of the day is to be the airport for New Haven. That means an airport that works for both leisure, for young families. As I said in the press conference, the mayor was talking about, there are so many kids in New Haven who have never even been on an airplane. This will allow $59 starting flights. That is an accessible flight for people. There also is a part of the city that has business travel, and we will try to accommodate that. But we are going to do it in a New Haven-centric way based on what the New Haven market is, and the New Haven market is both.
Tony Hart, the former mayor, who was a big champion of expanding the airport when she was on the radio here, I asked about the short-term trends, and she said it's important not to look at the short-term trends. And I'm guessing, Jorge, that obviously you guys look 5, 10, 30 years out. She said what's important is to have the infrastructure in place because those trends do change. So if for a while, not just because of COVID, if business travel is not down for 5 years, that it does come back, and that she felt that the locations that have the infrastructure in place then are poised when the opportunity comes. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. You're listening to WNHH Dateline New Haven and your home for community radio. We have the pleasure today of having Jorge Roberts, the CEO of Avports, and Sean Scanlon, who runs Tweed New Haven Authority, talking about the 43-year lease and their plan to invest $70 million to expand the airport. And we have Lorena. We are definitely going to get to your questions. I want to get to the critiques people have come, but first I want to have people kind of understand the deal. So East Haven, for Morris Cove, there was always opposition to expand the airport, but there also was not opposition. You hear from the people, and it's legitimate opposition. It's not everybody, right? But East Haven, I always had the idea that until 5 minutes ago, everybody in East Haven was against the airport. Was I wrong about that too? Because I didn't live there. Because you represent them in the state senate. What happened? What changed in East Haven that they would actually support this project?
So I don't actually represent East Haven. I have a lot of roots in East Haven. My grandmother used to live in East Haven, and I feel like I understand a little bit.
You're out in Brantford and Guilford, right?
I'm Brantford and Guilford. But look, I think there is a very easy narrative that says that people in East Haven and New Haven don't like the airport. I think that that's actually wrong. I won my first election as a state rep, knocking on 5,000 doors. I think I've talked about it on your show before. And when I took this job, I decided to go out and door knock myself. And every day, just about this summer, I didn't do it a lot during COVID because people were kind of freaked out. But this summer, I've been out there every day talking to people. And by and large, most people in the neighborhood actually like the airport.
But I always had that impression too, because just like I live in Westville, I loved when they had concerts there. Even though you heard from the people who didn't want the concerts, I loved being able to walk and seeing Lake Street Dive, right?
So I think there's a misconception, because I think there is a small but vocal minority of people who
that's legitimate opposition. They get more organized. Opponents are always more organized than supporters,
and that's fine.
And legislators feel they have to respond to that.
And listen, we're happy to answer any questions that those people have. I've been engaged. I know most of them by name, and I've sat on most of their porches and talked to them, and I'm going to continue doing that. But the thing is, to answer your question, Paul, I think that people in both New Haven and East Haven see what this could mean for both the town and the city and the region. But
something did change in East Haven. The mayors felt they couldn't sign agreements before. April Capone, when she was the mayor, really took a lot of heat for a much more modest version of an agreement, and now they signed on. Did something switch?
Well, I think part of it, as Jorge and I have talked about a little bit, is just new people in the room, right? When I came in this job in November of 2019, Jorge had just started his job. Both the mayor of East Haven and New Haven changed in November of 2019. There were some new faces at the table, so we weren't relitigating the same past fights. And so I think that really helped when we sat down and sort of said, without some of that ancient history that was weighting us down and sort of informing our position, we just sort of sat down and said, what do we need to do? And I heard loud and clear, as did Jorge, from both Mayor Elliker and Mayor Carfora, I need community benefits for the people of these places. And we really worked hard at that. And part of the deal that Jorge is willing to put forward is $5 million of community benefits. This is the first time in the history of the airport there has ever been a community benefits agreement.
All right. So before I get to Lorena, and I promise later we will get to the critiques of the plan because that's important and they want to address them. I want people to know a little bit about Jorge because you're going to be an important corporate leader in the city, even if you are operating in 10 and when I thought it was 150 cities. You had kind of an interesting background. You grew up in Mexico with a single mom, right?
Correct.
And you went to University of Washington. You worked as a ballroom dance instructor, a bank teller. You kind of done it all, and you were a professional. You thought I'd become a professional dancer. Then you got interested in international relations, and you got a Harvard School MBA. But you made this pivot to investment banking, which I'm sure does pull in a lot of that interest in government relations and How did you make that pivot, and how did that fit into your goals of a life to have a career like that?
Yeah, no, I've always been interested in economic development, and that's what drew me to international relations and what makes, benefits communities. And at the intersection is infrastructure and airports. And that's what brings, that part of the interest in business, economics, and mainly economic development. And in this case, this is like these type of projects are the ones that bring that into play and that interest and that intellectual curiosity, but also making sure that leave a better place.
So what you do day to day now is you're in charge of how 10 airports run. Now some are commercial airports and some are military bases, correct?
It's more the only that some are joint use, like Stewart Airport or Moffett Airfield, which includes NASA. The other ones are the commercial ones are Albany, Westchester, like I said, is a hybrid. And the rest are all, and Stewart is a commercial airport, and the rest are all corporate aviation.
And infrastructure is just a buzzword now. You might have been talking about infrastructure in the 90s, but it's really now in America we're saying this is something, how are we going to define infrastructure? So do you see maintaining the grid with air travel as sort of an important public policy goal?
Absolutely. The airports are beacons and engines of economic growth, and that's been widely studied and we think that this project won't be any different. And I think that's why, to Sean's point, there's a lot of people that are in favor of it because they see that it can bring, that economic benefit. And if you go to many airports around the country, you could see that economic activity that comes from, interconnecting people and bringing people from, you just mentioned, the biotech firm and, bringing new businesses and allowing people to actually, go back and forth. And that movement of people from the beginning of time, right, of humanity is what creates trade, right? And that's what creates economic prosperity.
All right. So let's get to the people who aren't happy about what you're doing.
Sure.
Lorena. So is Lorena a neighbor?
Lorena lives in East Haven, yeah.
Oh, in East Haven.
I probably shouldn't say that, but sorry, Lorena,
okay.
to blow up your spot. But yes.
Okay. So Lorena says the 43-year lease. And your company's a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs. She says the 43-year lease only benefits investors of private bonds. That is financial math done by Goldman Sachs. Site plan review answers are needed for environmental, traffic noise, and air pollution. Westchester County Airport expansion was stopped by residents in 2019 by voting out politicians. We need a supplement to the master plan called Community Benefits Plan, and there are no primary documents for East Haven residents. And when local people fly to Florida, they take their money and spend it. Well, people come back, right? Okay. So what are your responses to Lorena?
Listen, always happy to have this dialogue. I'll try to break through a couple of those. You can remind me what some of the things were. But on the city plan, the site plan, we've spent 7 weeks with the City Plan Commission staff here in New Haven. We had a 4-hour public hearing last week. There'll be another hearing tomorrow night. We're really confident that we have put together a strong package that meets the moment of this and is going to be accepted by them and approved by them tomorrow night. On the rest of the documents, everything is public. We had a negotiation behind closed doors because that's what negotiations can sometimes be about. Because we are a public entity, we have to transfer.
Is the 43-year lease available?
It hasn't been negotiated yet. So the first step in the process is the Board of Alders have to sign off on us getting a 43-year lease extension. Without that, we obviously have nothing to negotiate. Once that's approved, we have to negotiate that. My board will have to debate that publicly in the light of day. People can come, they can express their viewpoint on that. I'm sure that they certainly will do that. Obviously, my board of directors was appointed by mayors in both East Haven and New Haven. So there is a lot of transparency that's happening. We have released every document so far. The only documents that came out were we signed a letter of intent with Avports on May 6th to continue the dialogue and continue that negotiation once we released what the contents of that were. And we did what's called the Fifth Amendment, which is what governs our relationship around doing the West Terminal improvements, which is basically the project we need to do to accommodate Avelo. Like I said, I knock on doors every day. I've gone to at least 5 public meetings in the last 2 months. We got another one on Thursday night. Nathan Hale School. Show up, ask me a question. My cell phone number is 203-800-6331. You can text me. You can call me. I'm out there, man. And if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And what time at Nathan Hale?
I think it's at 6 o'clock at Nathan Hale.
All right. So Rachel Hirama, who lives on the Morris Cove side,
yep.
She's an environmentalist. She's been opposed to it. She has a group called 10,000 Hawks, which I think was a good name. I like that name. So among her questions were, can we see the project area agreement? Can we see the economic analysis that predicts 10,000 jobs?
I mean, I think that the economic analysis is something that definitely is a public document, so we can definitely release that. Happy to give it to Rachel. I have offered to sit down with Rachel many, many times. She rejects me doing that, and that's fine. That's her right. But always happy to sit down with her, walk her through any of these questions, answer any of these questions, give her any of the documents that are public. And Rachel, let's talk.
And then here's an overriding question for people like myself who aren't that immersed in the details. When talking about infrastructure, she talks about global warming. And the UN, she says the UN and the U.S. government has set public policy goals to reduce fossil fuel benefits, including airports, with the idea that even though you have a plan to be net carbon neutral, that air travel is harmful to the environment per mile compared to other forms of transportation. Any thoughts on that? I do.
The New York Times and a lot of academic research shows that air travel accounts for 2% of all global carbon emissions. That is not insignificant, 2%. I understand certainly contributes to it, but when we talk about this in the grand scale of addressing climate change, air travel is very, 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 very far down on the list. What's happening on Interstate 95 right now is 100 times worse than what we do at the airport, even if we were to expand the airport. And so do we need to address that? Yes. Should we be more carbon neutral and do what we can to mitigate that? Yes. But we are not at a point as a country or as a world where we're going to get rid of air travel yet. We have not found another sustainable way to do what we do. And in fact, if you actually look at this, we were talking about this with Andrew Levy last week. If you look at air travel versus flying down to Florida, for example, it is actually better for the environment than you filling up your gas tank 3 or 4 times to drive your family from New Haven to Florida.
Now, freight's an even bigger issue, right? Because the truck's on the road. Are we envisioning more freight travel at the airport? And why is that?
I have said from day one, and so is Jorge, there's no plan for freight. People keep talking about this. I don't know how many more times I can be clear about this. There's no plan for freight.
Why isn't there? Why do we want trucking?
Why would you? I'm sorry.
Isn't air travel by freight an alternative to trucking?
It may be an alternative to trucking, but it's not something that our business model right now comprehends.
Okay. And the other big environmental concern is wetlands.
Yeah.
Whether, and I've seen different estimates that are wildly different. Will Tweed be underwater in 20, 30 years? I guess you want to be investing $7 million if you thought it was going to be underwater. Or will it harm the fragile environment around it?
And I go back to the community benefits, right? The mayor obviously is a very well-known environmentalist. I have a record in my other job of being one as well. I care about this issue a lot. My family is from New Haven originally. My mom lives close by in the city, and so certainly wouldn't be doing anything that I thought was bad for the environment in a place that I love. But I don't expect that everyone's just going to take my word for it or Jorge's word for it. So what we have to do is we have to do an environmental analysis. And that environmental analysis is guided based on what the FAA thinks. It's what DEEP, the state agency regarding this, thinks. We will have a very public process that is going to kick off next month where anybody can come, ask questions, talk about what they think we should be studying, whether it's noise, air pollution, wildlife, wetlands, all those things we will do. And then we have to get permission from both the FAA and DEEP to move forward. Those two agencies are not going to let us do anything.
DEEP is Department of Environmental Protection.
Yeah, sorry.
Energy and Environmental Protection.
And on top of that, we're committed to building a carbon neutral terminal. The interesting part about it is the industry is moving towards that. We're starting to see emergence of electrical aviation, electrical vertical takeoff, sustainable aviation fuel.
What is electrical vertical takeoff?
Yeah, so it's basically drones for adults, right? If you can think about it, and it's basically not taking off on a runway, but actually like a helicopter. And the future is they're going to be autonomous, electrical. There's about a dozen companies working towards manufacturing. There's a lot of money
I'm a real
going
idiot
through
about
that.
this. You're saying that we're going to have like the equivalent of self-driving cars with airplanes?
Correct. Yeah.
That are going to not be running on.
Well, that's where things are headed, right?
In a while.
In a while, but I'm just. But the main theme here is there's a movement towards a much more environmentally sustainable industry, and there's a lot of future. We're building some other airports sustainable aviation fuel, and that's the more immediate.
And hydrogen powered.
Hydrogen powered, particularly right now. For example, we just signed an MOU with a company that does hydrogen powered vehicles. And they're putting those stations around different airports, and the idea is to maybe replace the fleet at different airports. And
by vehicles, do you mean planes?
I beg your pardon?
Planes for vehicles or cars?
No, cars. I'm talking about
for the fleets at the airports.
The fleets like the pickups and the SUVs you see out there for operations and all kinds of.
So this is for all your 10 airports.
Well, no. We're working towards that.
Toward having a
more sustainable
converting your fleets and having them charged. Just a lot of people have been writing in. I just want to say a number of people mentioned the freight issue. You dealt with that. You're saying it's just not true because they're saying a couple people are saying that that's the end game in their view. But
couldn't be more clear, Paul. I mean, I say it at every public meeting. People continue to braze it, and I'm not sure what else I can say.
Because Rachel says Westchester County does a lot of freight. And that this is only a 5-year plan that then lets you change it later. But there's anything in there that would... Okay. And then Rachel says wetlands are a carbon sink equivalent to rainforests.
And so again...
you're saying you are going to preserve them would be your answer?
What I'm saying is, even if we wanted to be bad neighbors and bad partners when it came to the environment, which we most certainly do not, there are regulators that job exists to protect those things, like wildlife or wetlands, that will be the ones who have to sign off on what we're doing. And I think that, even if we didn't want to be good actors here, which we do, there are safeguards in place. And I don't understand, how many more times we can be very clear about that. It's important to us. It will continue being important to us. And this process that we're about to enter, the environmental assessment, will be demonstrating to the community how
it'll be kind of interesting discussion about if the industry is in this period of change about trying to switch to new environmental models, whether it's the fleet at the airports, the hydrogen pumping, or these future drones for adults. It'll be interesting to see us in the middle of that discussion. Jean Edwards Chiepo is from East Haven, right, saying the reason she's feeling, or if it's he, I apologize, is concerned about the freight is because Amazon building their hubs in West Haven and Orange, having 18-wheelers going 24/7, so there will be pressure. There'll be institutional pressure at some point to switch to a freight model for them.
But again, whether they're building them in this area, that's great for those communities. It's not part of the plan. We have no plan to do it. And so, again...
And just so some of you folks know, we're not going to read any comments that call anyone names, just so the... Okay.
All right.
But we will tell you that you're listening to Dateline in New Haven, WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. Is there a relationship between Avello and Avports?
No, beyond, us being an operator of the airport. They're serving the market and us helping the authority establish that agreement with the airline.
And what other kind of cities are we honestly looking toward next? You had mentioned you'd like to see DC.
I think it's going to be more like as Sean said, a combination of other leisure and business. You mentioned some institutions that have asked for additional connectivity. So some of the markets like Chicago, DC. Are very likely.
And again, why would Chicago work if it didn't last time? Just because the industry's changed in a way that small carriers are going to be able to outcompete? Are we partly betting that small, newer, nimble carriers can outcompete the legacy airlines, sort of the way that new media is outcompeting legacy media? I mean, is that kind of the idea?
Well, that's the case, right? And if you look at, arguably the most successful airline in the history of our industry is Southwest Airlines.
Right.
And they started that way, and now we had other carriers like JetBlue, Spirit Airlines, Allegiant, all these, and the new ones, Avelo and Breeze, and you just have to look at the experience of Europe, for example, where there the low-cost carriers are the ones who dominate the market. And why? Because it's accessible, affordable travel. And there you have a much bigger network of trains, but there's that demand. Meaning, like I think Sean hit the nail on the head. It's about complementary. It's not either or. It's more of and, right? And looking at modes of transport and making them much more accessible, much more affordable, and hopefully more sustainable in the future as well. So.
And what's the deal with Bradley? Is their capacity limited?
I haven't studied Bradley per se, but I would say that we believe that in the catchment area that the airport serves, it's an underserved market. It's not being served by Bradley.
In other words, there's enough to go around. Like if you're living in Sean's district, it's not that much different to drive to Bradley or Tweed, is it? It's a half hour less, which I guess matters.
It's a huge difference because the convenience that we offer is the other thing here, right? I'm not trying to knock Bradley. We get along with Kevin Dillon, who's the head of CA. He actually called me while we were on this phone. So, we don't look at it like we're trying to stop what they're doing. I think in both of my jobs, it's better. The more options that people have in Connecticut, the better we are as a state from an economic development perspective and from a perspective of quality of life, right? If you're a family who lives in West Haven or in Clinton or in Madison, I want you to be able to look at our prices, look at the convenience that we offer, look at the product that we offer, and judge that based on, do you want to drive to Newark or Bradley or whatever? And I'm confident that once we actually give somebody a product that they can afford, number one, and that they know about, number two, which is the two biggest problems that we've had at Tweed in the past, I think they're going to pick us every time. And I'm confident that we will get to the place that will be the case.
And I think just to add to what Sean's saying, it's about offering choices, right? And it's about being, giving the best experience to the passenger. And that's what the idea that we want to make it, a good experience, but also affordable and convenient, as Sean is saying. And if people decide to go to the other airports, we just got to do a better job. And but the market is large enough that airports could coexist, right?
Okay, and Rachel said, why haven't they studied Bradley? Were you saying you didn't study Bradley, or just that you were studying the catchment area?
We're not saying that. Nobody's saying that we're not studying Bradley. We're just saying that what we studied was what exactly is going on in this area. Is it underserved or is it served? And the answer to that is it's definitely underserved. And therefore, what we're trying to put together and what we're proposing to the public and what we're trying to get permission to do is to create an airport that is a workable, more vibrant airport for New Haven. Doesn't mean that we want to try to replicate the model of Bradley or any other airport that Jorge runs, which sometimes comes up a lot too. People say, oh, you want to turn this into Westchester. We don't. A lot of things that Westchester doesn't work here, and we don't want it to work here. We want to do what we have to do for New Haven to serve the market, both leisure, business, and most importantly, be a good neighbor and be in keeping with the spirit and the community of what the community has.
All right. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about the notion of public-private partnership, which I guess since industrial policy came into view with Japan that we were modeling after in the 80s and 90s, the idea here, if I understand it correctly, is that government will not have enough money to invest or shouldn't need to invest all that money, that the private market has an incentive to make these structural improvements so that we can have profitable commercial air travel. That's what infrastructure is about. And then there are big concerns on D. Mullings, by the way, says New Haven County would serve the community well. Thank you for the comment, D. Are there downsides to public-private partnerships? Like if you guys find, if conditions really change in 3 years, are you not on the hook for certain improvements that wouldn't make you guys profit, but maybe leave New Haven on the hook?
No, I think the idea is to structure an agreement and a partnership that it's equitable and that it has mechanisms to adjust for changes in conditions and over time and the idea is that in this case the authority is transferring the risk to a private operator. And what does the private operator get in benefit?
Because is there a lot of public-private infrastructure deals that were bad for the public? Like when Chicago sold the highways to a private company, it turns out the tolls went through the roof and there wasn't enough built in where you can hold them to promises about long-term improvements that were in the public interest. How is air travel different? Because there are times when it makes a lot of sense to have the public-private partnership.
Yeah, I can't speak about those deals because it's all about how we structure.
But you talk about the assumption of risk going on the private. So what do you get in return for that risk?
Well, it's commensurate, right? Risk and reward.
Right. So you get to share in the reward.
Yeah, and that's but it's shared with. It's a partnership again. with the authority and with the community.
So how much do we get out of that reward if your bet pays off? Does most of the profit go to you for having taken that risk, and our public benefit is having the airport that can get people to and from and support economic activity? Or can we look at it, will we look at it 20 years later if you're really successful, and I hope you are, by the way, if you're really successful in 20 years, are we going to look back and say, man, we should have built this ourselves with public dollars because we would have then reaped the benefits?
Well, if I can, Jorge can chime in. The city of New Haven doesn't have those public dollars. It's not a possibility right now, given the situation fiscally in the city of New Haven. The state doesn't really have the dollars to do that, nor the inclination to do that. He does. And so what I view this as the public side of the public-private partnership is that this will be a win-win for both of us. They will make investments. They will benefit financially from that. But the people who I serve as the executive director of a quasi-public airport will be benefiting from the fact that there will finally be better air service there. And that will either help them from a leisure perspective, or it will definitely help them from an economic development perspective. And I think that win-win is exactly what's driving us doing this P3 right now, because both sides win. It's not an either or. They just win if they get a lot of money and we all lose. That's not the way it is.
And, you guys make a very persuasive personal pitch. When you're looking at a deal like this, you also have to wonder who comes in if Jorge moves on to run the State Department or something, and Sean goes on to being a U.S. representative. Will the people come in next be people? What protects us from the change of personnel?
What I would say is, certainly Jorge and I are not going to have these jobs for 43 years. But we're
I'm on my 43rd.
we're structuring the deal in a way that will live beyond us in a way that's sustainable, keeping the public's interest in mind. And that's a very, very important distinction. So it doesn't matter how long I'll be here or how long he's going to be here. I'm not saying we're going anywhere, but I'm just saying we're structuring a deal that's going to work and outlive both of us to the benefit of this community and the state.
And can I add to that? Look, next year airports will be 95 years in existence. We're a long-term operator. It's had many ownerships. It started as a division of Pan Am Airlines, and it used to be called Pan Am World Services. And when it started with this partnership, and 22 years ago, and since then it's had many different ownerships, but things have not changed because the company is still the same, and the agreement, and that's what we're trying to ensure that it's sustainable for the future, and it withstands all these different changes that we just have been
Nathan
speaking about.
and I'm sorry about messing up your middle name. Bixby writes, it's not just about markets, which are not defined by people's need, but by flow of money. And I think it's getting more in your major. In this equation, the basis of life itself is not represented in the market. So I think he's saying that market factors don't take into effect human impacts.
No, of course they do, and that's why we are going through these different processes, as Sean has explained, in terms of the environmental process. We're making commitments into community benefits because we know that it's not just about bringing passengers in and out, but there's actually a community partnership, and that's what we're focused on.
And so, if I can, one of the things that Andrew Levy talked about that I was blown away by was they did this contest where they sort of said, hey, pick where you want the flight to go. They had 6,000 people from the area here making a selection about where they want to go. And it was no surprise that most of them were Florida-based because that's where most people want to go. Does that mean that's all we're going to go for the rest of time? No, of course not, because there are other interests. But it's about knowing what's up with the community, making informed choices, and I think that's what this is all about.
And for us, it's like being about a good corporate citizen because it's just good business, right? As you mentioned, we're not just a one airport. Our business is to be in other airports, and what we want is have a good reputation, and somebody call New Haven and say, how did airports do? How did this project? We're not a developer. We're not just going to build something and leave. We're here for the long term, and that's the commitment we're giving.
All right, I'm sorry I couldn't get to everyone's comments. If you want to go on the New Haven Independent Facebook page, you can see the discussion that's going back and forth with folks. I appreciate all the comments, and I very much appreciate the time ran fast. Sean Scanlon and Jorge Roberts from Tweed New Haven Airport Authority and Avports. Thanks for coming in and making the time. I found it really fascinating. I learned a lot about the business. Looking forward to those adult drones for adults.
Good to be here, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night. on WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.